Ah, jeez. I gotta do everything around here. Come on, Gibson. Where's your quality control?
Hello, Richard from budgetguitarist.com. Today we're going old school. I'm taking you back to the old school because I'm an old fool who's so cool. If you want to get down, I'm going to show you the way. Whoop, there it is, the Floor Pod Plus. It's 20 to 25-year-old technology, sure, but today we're going to listen to how crappy it really does actually sound and how we can improve it. So today we're going to take the Floor Pod Plus, which is basically a Pod 2 in floorboard format, and we're going to compare the cabinet simulators, the cabinet speaker sims, inside of this old relic with modern IR files. What happens if you run these amp models through a modern IR file? We don't have to wonder because we're going to do it. We're going to find out. We're going to go for it. So without any further delay, let's get into it. We begin with the tread plate model. So this is supposed to be like a boogie, I guess. You'll notice that it's like really woofy. Okay, so now I'm going to disable the cabinet simulator inside of the floor pod, and I'm going to enable an own hammer IR file using my HX Stomp. So here's the original. Let's see if we can clear up some of that tubbiness. It's still a little woofy, but it definitely does sound better. An improvement, but not a great sound. Let's move on. This is a modern high gain sound with, I believe, some reverb and delay. Let's see. Usable. Let's check it out with the IR file. I have no idea if that's going to come across via YouTube audio, but in the room, it's a lot smoother sounding. All right, let's go on to our next model. This is the Brit High Gain model. That does not sound good. Now, let me tell you why it doesn't sound good. There's a whole bunch of mid-frequencies, mid-range frequencies that are just really sticking out there, annoying. And I can tell if I cranked up the volume right now, this would hurt my ears. It is not a smooth sound, it's a harsh sound. Now, to its credit, there was a lot of 70s rock guitar sounds that did sound like that, harsh and nasty. Let's see if we can improve it with an IR file. Now that's a huge difference. That's actually not bad. Let me switch it back again. Or so the amp models in here, the amp simulations from 20 to 25 years ago, it's not that they're necessarily terrible, but they're really, really hurt by the speaker cabinet simulations from 20 to 25 years ago. Amp modeling's got better, but speaker cabinet simulation has gotten way better. Okay, let's move on to our fourth and final model. Let's see what we got here. This is essentially the same amp. This is Brit high gain. It looks like it's got some different settings. Like the bass is cranked up or something. It's kind of muffly. There's definitely reverb. This one sounds better than the last one, actually. It's not terrible in the room. I don't know what it sounds like on YouTube. It's not bad. Like I could make this work in a gig. Let's see what it sounds like with the IR. And definitely better. It's smoother, right? It's flatter. It's more pleasing to your ears. This is not a bad sound. You know, this has got me thinking. See, this is my backup rig for my HX Stomp. If I'm going to gig with the setup that I have right now, I'm using the HX Stomp. And if something happens to that, this would be good to have in the trunk to be able to pull out and, you know, use in a pinch. The thing is, I'm starting to wonder, you can buy like a little Hotone Hot One, however the hell you say the company name. You can buy one of those boxes for what, 100, 120 bucks that has IR files. And you can load your own IR files into them. So what I'm wondering is, what if I spend the $100, $120 on one of those things, and I pair that with this, and that's my backup rig. So for about 100, 120 more bucks, I can make this thing sound way better. That's something to consider. If I do that, I'll sort of have like the poor man's Pod Go in a way, right? Poor indeed. Here's the thing. There's a handful of amp models on this old dinosaur. There's a handful of cabinets. There's a handful of effects. On the Pod Go, you have tons of amp models. You have tons of cabinets, plus you can load your own IR files. And you have tons and tons of effects. There's like 5 or 6 different kinds of compressors alone. So Does it make any sense whatsoever to spend more money on something like this? That's a tough question. I mean, I would say no. In an emergency, I could make this thing work. You just EQ it at the board to take out some of the harsh mid-range. Guitar wouldn't sound that good for that gig. But, you know, most of your audience isn't really going to be able to tell the difference between a Helix or a Kemper or an HX Stomp or a Floor Pod Plus. I mean, they might if you sit down and say, okay, now everybody in the club be quiet. Everybody, hey, you, put the beer down. Now everybody be quiet. Turn the TV off. Listen, I'm going to compare these two guitar sounds, and then you tell me which one sounds better. Yeah, right. But really, what they're going to be listening to is the drums and the bass, the whole mix, the vocals, the song itself, the song selection. How well are you singing it? This is just one variable in that whole mess. In that whole soup. It's one ingredient in that whole pot of soup. Or is it stew? It's stew. It's rock and roll stew. And this is beef bouillon. And the HX Stomp is real beef broth. And then the real tube amp would be like homemade beef broth? I don't know. Anyway, so does this have a whole lot of practical value to anybody? Well, let's say that you have a Pod 2 and you're using it for home recording and you're really strapped for cash and you're thinking, I'd love to have a Pod Go, but it's $450 and all I got's $100. On one hand, you might say that's a good idea for a budget player. But I would argue this, if you care about your tone, you care about your tone. Why spend $100 and make something a little bit more gooder when you can save up your money, get your $450, buy a Pod Go, and have the same kind of sounds that some of the pros like Pete Thorne are using out of the box. There are a lot of pro players using Helix these days, and Helix is on an awful lot of recordings. Now, this is a little difficult for me because I do own two tube amps, and I love them both. I love my Bass Breaker 15 that's behind the keyboard over here, if you can see it. I do. I love it. And it's a lot of fun to crank it up. It's got a really nasty attitude, and I really enjoy it. But for the kind of gigs that I'm doing all by myself, well, I'd rather have the convenience of just putting everything through my PA. Here's where I've always stood on this. If you have to compete with a live drummer, then a tube amp is a really, really great thing to have. Something like a Pod Go could also be great, but you're really at the mercy of the PA. When you bring your own PA, and you can spend hours dialing in the sound to get it exactly how you want. In some ways, that can be better than a tube amp. But if you're at the mercy of the club and you have no idea what kind of speakers they're going to have, it's kind of nice to have a real amp. I believe there's room in the universe for both. For recording, there are circumstances where I'm going to use the tube amp. But if I want to sound like, say, Eddie Van Halen, I can't do it with either of my two amps. They don't sound that way. I can't get them to sound that way, but the HX Stomp can definitely sound that way. With the variety of guitar sounds that I need, I'm covering everything from Elton John to Steely Dan to Porcupine Tree. I need all the guitar sounds. No one tube amp could hope to compete with the sheer variety of songs that I'm throwing at it. And of course, right now, this is all rhetorical because I have no gigs, because we are still in lockdown mode. I'm hoping that by next summer I'm going to be doing gigs again, which gives me an awful lot of time to practice. I'm really not going to have any excuse. I'm going to end this video now, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to start practicing some more for the gigs that I'm going to have a year from now. Thank you very much for watching. If somehow you found this entertaining, and even if you didn't, please consider subscribing, clicking the little bell, and of course, as usual, we will see you again next Friday at 5.
Jeez, look at this thing. It's like flying the Starship Enterprise. Captain, I'm gonna launch the photon torpedoes. There. We blew the crap out of them Klingons. What? The Klingons are our friends now? Ah, jeez.